So, ladies and gentlemen, it's our ETalk chapter 4. Hope everybody's fine this afternoon here in Vietnam and wherever you are. So we have here our honor guest today, Mr. Simon Galpin. Mr. Simon has a multitude of experience worldwide, really. And his newest venture is in VC, based in Bahrain. And today we're gonna have a chat with Simon about the work he's done, his experiences, and hopefully we can gather a lot of knowledge from him and the insights of the FDI environment and also the VC world. So Simon now, he's representing Plus Venture based in Bahrain. And I hope you enjoy our ETalk today. And we should start with, I'll share a bit about our climate in Vietnam at the recent time. So bear with me, I'm gonna share my screen here. Right. Sorry, 1 second. Alrighty. Sorry, just a second. All right. So today I'm gonna talk about the investment climate first, and then Simon will talk about his decades of experience worldwide. And then we can end with an open discussion with, we're gonna open questions to everybody. And so Vietnam at the recent stage, we're one of the fastest growing and relatively stable country in terms of economics in the last decade or so. Even during the COVID time, our GDP growth is about 2.1%. So it's lower than the expected number, but with the pandemic hitting Vietnam 2 years straight, it's actually better than forecasted number after the pandemic. So our GDP last year ended up with 343 billion, and hopefully this year it's gonna go up to 373. The growth, this year, hopefully it's gonna almost double from last year. We're hopeful to hit 5.5%. And inflation is actually going down. The government is trying to control inflation the best effort they could. The goal is to be below 4% every year. And we hit that mark for the last few years. So GDP by sector, historically, Vietnam was a agricultural country, but during the last few decades, we've been shifting ourselves towards service and industry. So last year, service actually was the most highest GDP sector by 41.6%, followed by the industry and then agriculture. We have one of the highest population in Southeast Asia, and that's appealing to investors because we have a good workforce. We have 97.6 million, 56% are working age, and our average age is quite young, which is 32. Population growth is slowed down a bit in the last few years, so we're only aiming for about 98.2 million this year. So as you can see here, the GDP has been quite constant, and inflation was kept low for the last 10 years, 6-7 years or so. Since the last recession, our inflation was actually 21.66%, and with the aggressive monitoring of the government, it's been quite low recently, and that's a good sign. Our population is also in what economists call the golden population structure. So for every 2 working persons, there's only 1 dependent person. So what makes Vietnam an interesting and attractive country to invest in? Firstly, it's our political system. We have a one-party government, and our stability index is quite high with no violence. It's in the Country Watch site, they rate our index at 4.5, which is in the upper echelon. And the reformation of laws and supportive tools towards investing and FDIs are quite impressive in the last few years. So we've restructured labor law, land law, competition, enterprise law, investment law, and so forth to create the climate more transparent and easier to invest in. Our infrastructure is also a plus, and the infrastructure reformation is also quite aggressive and ambitious. We're in the process of building a highway that links the border of China, which is the northern point, all the way to the south. That will be over 3,200 kilometers long. It will be completed within the next decade, which is a long time, but we're hopeful that it will help a lot of transportation and goods moving a lot faster. Our airport, we have a new airport in place, which is under construction also. It's going to be a mega airport. It's going to be the biggest one in Vietnam. It's going to host 25 million passengers a year and cargo capacity of 1.2 million tons. Seaport is another key point in investing in Vietnam. So Vietnam has a coastline of over 3,000 kilometers long, and we have over 100 ports throughout the country. Even with that amount, the three biggest cities that are port cities are Thong, Da Nang, and Ho Chi Minh City. And so the government is building a mega port down south, which is going to be also the biggest port in our region. It's going to be in the southernmost point in Vietnam, in a region called 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and it's going to accommodate mega ships that carry up to 250,000 tons. Labor force is another as I said before, our population is good for working because we're young and we're hungry for work. So our labor force was rated quite high in the region. Our labor force is young, hardworking, highly literate, and easy to train. Namely, a lot of mega corporations like Samsung, LG, and so forth, even Foxconn is coming in. These high-tech sectors, they're coming in and using our labor force. And our labor force is quite affordable compared to other countries in the region. And also, another governmental support is a tax incentive for FDIs and so forth. So we have a lot of tax cuts for FDIs in the high-tech sector, biotech, and the supporting industries. So the tax rate is only about 10% for 15 years or even the lifetime of the project. They have a corporate income tax exemption for 4 years and reduction for the next 4 years to 5 years. Other sectors that the government is aiming for a lot of more FDI and investment are infrastructure projects, socialized projects like in education, sporting, healthcare, a lot of manufacturing, as I'll show you in a later graph. A lot of software production, environmental protection also gets these very lucrative tax cuts. So the government has made a lot of effort in the last 20 years to integrate ourselves into the global economy. So 2007 was our big year, and it was a huge milestone where we joined the WTO for the first time. And since then, we keep making international connections and FTAs that benefits the trading between countries. So after the WTO, we joined the Asian Economic Community, and then the CPTPP, followed up with a Europe-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which is in effect earlier last year, and the UK Free Trade Agreement. So for the next 10 years, Vietnam will lower tariffs for goods and services that come from Europe, and Europe will abolish tariffs within 7 years. Alongside the EVFTA, we also have the EVIPA, the Investment Protection Agreement. So to usher a lot more investment into Vietnam, to make our climate more transparent, more workable, we have this investment protection for investors worldwide to come in, from Europe to come in and invest in us. And it's proven a lot of cases that a lot more European investments have came in the recent years. Most recently, we joined the Regional Comprehensive Partnership, the RCEP. The negotiation was done during the last 8 years. And within the RCEP, there are the Asian states, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And it is the biggest Asian trade pact to date. It serves 2.2 billion people, and with a combined size GDP of 26.2 trillion. So that's about 30% of the world GDP. So the FDI climate right now in Vietnam, in 2020, we netted $28.5 billion with 23 new projects. The main sector is still industrial manufacturing with over 8 billion, 800 projects. Next up was energy and natural resources, and then real estate and so forth. The new FDIs that came in Vietnam, the biggest contributor is Singapore, followed by China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and South Korea. So what's it look like right now? I mean, in 2021, we have even better numbers. In Vietnam right now, there are about 810,000 businesses. And by 2025, the government is ushering new laws and tax cuts and so forth and support system. And we're hopeful to gain 1.5 million businesses in 2025. The aggressive policies also help. So there's a lowering of fees, less paperwork. So in 2021, there has been 67 countries that invested FDI into Vietnam across 18 sectors. About 600 projects has been disbursed. The buzzword right now is energy in Vietnam, and during the first 2 quarters, namely liquidating natural gases with about $6 billion of asset. So that Singapore invested 3.2 billion and Japan invested 1.5 billion in LNG factories. Renewable energy is another buzzword around here. As I said, we have about 3,000 kilometers of coastline. So it's been measured. It's been talked about that Vietnam is going to be one of the 5 main sustainable energy sources in the world, along with America, South America, East Asia, and Scandinavia. Our coastline is capable of pumping out 400 gigawatt, and the cost per gigawatt here is only 2.3 to $3 billion, and that's very competitive compared to other regions. And so the Scandinavia has invested a lot in us, namely Denmark. Denmark put in $10 billion for a lot of these wind power plants. So that's the climate right now. So I'm going to pass the floor to Mr. Simon Galpin, and he's going to share a lot with you about his experience in the FDI industry and his new experience in the VC world. Please, Simon. Simon, can you unmute your mic, please?
I'm just trying. There we go. Okay,
right.
listen.
Thank you.
Thong, thank you very much for that introduction. Very interesting. Some parallels there between Vietnam's approach to attracting FDI and that of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries as well in the Middle East. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. I'm delighted to be able to join your group. I'm going to take Can you hear okay?
We can hear you, Simon.
Okay. I'm going to share a few slides with you that talk a little bit about some of my experiences in foreign direct investment promotion, and of course, my more recent experience as a venture partner with a relatively new venture capital firm in the Middle East called 𝗘𝗧𝗹𝗶. But I'm new to VC, so most of my experience has been more in the economic development field. So I'll just try and share my screen now. Let's see if it works. All right. Bear with me. Is that okay? Can you see okay?
I can see fine. Please.
Perfect. All right. Well, a little bit about my bio. My name's Simon Galpin. I was born on the island of Malta. I grew up in the British Isles. I studied Chinese and worked on the island of Taiwan, and then moved and lived on Hong Kong Island for over 20 years. And more recently, 5 years ago, relocated to the Kingdom of Bahrain and now live on the island of Bahrain. So there's an awful lot of islands in my past working experience. In terms of my career, I started off working for Scottish Enterprise, which at that time was the largest economic development agency in Europe. And I helped them to establish a network of offices across Asia during my time with them. And then I was recruited to work for the Hong Kong government and joined the new investment promotion agency for Hong Kong, which of course is Invest Hong Kong. And I moved up through the ranks and became Director General at Invest Hong Kong. And during my time there, was involved in not only attracting foreign companies that used Hong Kong as a gateway into the rest of China, but increasingly supporting mainland Chinese companies to use Hong Kong as a platform to go global, to use it as a base to make investments all around the world. And during the latter part of my time in Hong Kong, I was very active in establishing a new organization called Start Me Up Hong Kong. And that was an umbrella group that really brought together the public sector and the private sector to support Hong Kong's thriving startup ecosystem. 5 years ago, I was invited by the Crown Prince to move to Bahrain, and I joined Bahrain's Economic Development Board and helped change the Economic Development Board into a full-service investment promotion agency. And we've been quite successful in attracting companies from really across the region to set up and use Bahrain as a base, but also we were successful in launching Startup Bahrain. Again, a partnership between the public sector and the private sector to really nurture the startup ecosystem and help promote that ecosystem to other ecosystems elsewhere in the world and develop linkages with other ecosystems in other countries. At the moment, I have a number of part-time roles. I've left the EDB now. I work as a venture partner for Plus VC, and I'll talk in more detail about what Plus VC is trying to achieve. Plus VC, though, is a venture capital firm based out of Abu Dhabi, and it focuses in early stage startups that are located in the MENA region. In addition to my role there, I'm a senior advisor for a large European consulting firm based in Belfast in Northern Ireland called OCO Global. And this firm really advises governments and corporates on trade and investment promotion, and actually helps different agencies to attract companies into their economy from around the world. Thirdly, I serve as an advisor on the advisory committee of a new equity crowdfunding platform, a tokenized crowdfunding platform that has been established in the Middle East and is looking to provide funding both for corporates and startups as well as for property development as well. And last but not least, I work for a university in Bahrain called the Applied Science University. And there I teach business, but also help support the university in developing partnerships and linkages with major corporates, major companies, but also other universities elsewhere in the world. And we would love to try and find some opportunity to develop partnerships with universities in Vietnam going forward. Turning back to the GCC, which are the Gulf countries in the Middle East, you can see they vary tremendously in size. By far the biggest economy in the region is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They have a population of around 35 million people and a GDP of 790 billion. Similar to Vietnam in terms of demographics, all the countries there have an average population, a median population of around 32 years old. So very similar to Vietnam in that respect. Taken together, all the GCC countries have a population of just under 60 million. So all of them together are actually smaller than Vietnam, but with a total GDP of 1,712 billion US dollars. World Investment Report has just announced their figures for all the economies in the world in terms of how successful they've been in attracting foreign direct investment. And you can see that although global FDI fell by 35% last year, the economies of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia saw some significant growth in terms of attracting investment. So even though the pie is getting smaller, the Middle East economies are doing well in getting a bigger share of that pie. And I think the fact that the demographics and the economic indicators are on their side is really a major factor in attracting this investment. So, you know, having a real demographic and geographic advantage is quite significant. Right across the GCC, we have a population of digital natives. People in the Arab world are early adopters. There are very high smartphone penetration rates. 5G and cloud infrastructure are some of the most advanced in the world. There are lots more data centers being put in, data regions being built up in Bahrain and right across the region. So, you know, 5G and cloud infrastructure is really top class. And this has led to a nascent but very vibrant startup ecosystem. And of course, the GCC is also benefiting from its location, because although it has a very young demographic advantage, it's between two much bigger areas of the world that are also very young populations with tremendous potential for growth. And by that, I mean sub-Saharan Africa on one side and South Asia on the other. And of course, there are some emerging opportunities that are causing a lot of investors to look at the region. Virtually every country in the GCC has a 2030 vision. And this vision is really about diversifying the economy away from oil and gas and into a number of new emerging, mostly tech and digital sectors. Having said that, although the economies are moving away from oil and gas, it's also quite reassuring that the oil price, which is a major factor in terms of generating government revenues, has recovered very strongly and is projected to increase by a further 20% in this year. Like Vietnam, economies across the region in the Middle East have got a very extensive program of regulatory reform. We're seeing a raft of new regulation, new data sovereignty regulation, insolvency laws, enabling small and medium-sized companies to fail and then bounce back bigger and better and stronger than before. But we also see a number of new and emerging sectors that are open to 100% foreign ownership. So you don't need to have a local partner. People can come in, invest in these sectors and have 100% ownership. We also see intense competition from not only the countries in the GCC region, but even the special economic zones within those countries to attract new investors. And this really is a tremendous opportunity for investors because, you know, they are constantly trying to find better ways to attract companies from around the world and offering them better and better incentives and better support to help them to grow in their respective economies. And also we're seeing tremendous investment in physical infrastructure, whether it's new rail networks, whether it's new airports, whether it's new causeways connecting the different economies to things like new universities, data centers, and so on. A lot of investment is going into hard physical infrastructure, and this presents opportunities for Vietnamese companies to come in as subcontractors, service providers, and even equipment suppliers as well. And finally, we have seen the Abraham Accords, and this means that there is a normalization of relations between some of the GCC countries, mainly between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. And this means that startups that are growing in Israel or growing in UAE can also benefit tremendously from, excuse me a second, can benefit tremendously from that. They can do business in both directions. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is, although the GCC has some big and small economies, we also find that that the smaller economies can offer tremendous potential, particularly for smaller businesses. Small is beautiful. So economies like Bahrain can offer tremendous opportunities to medium-sized companies from Vietnam. When I talk about smaller economies, the key thing that they offer is access. Access to regulators and decision makers. You know, when companies, fintech companies come into Bahrain, they can go into a regulatory sandbox, and that means that they can have a direct dialogue with the Central Bank of Bahrain. And even if they're small businesses, they can help shape the regulation so that the fintech regulations really suit the businesses as they grow throughout the region. In Bahrain, we joke about 2 degrees of separation, meaning that if you know one person in Bahrain, they can probably connect you to the right partner, the right investor, the right customer, just with 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation. And of course, there's tremendous access to those potential partners, investors, and customers. It's a small place. You can quickly raise your profile, build up a good network of contacts, and assess whether there is the market for your product or service in a very short space of time. And so that makes it a low-risk test market for many investors coming in. And of course, even though a small economy like Bahrain is a small island economy, it then can provide a very useful stepping stone to the larger neighboring economies, whether it's Saudi Arabia, which is connected to Bahrain by a long bridge, or to other larger economies such as India and sub-Saharan Africa. Starting off in a small economy can be a very good base for you to then expand. I'm now going to talk a little bit about the startup ecosystem right across the MENA region. The startup ecosystem in the GCC is at an early stage, but it is really poised for very rapid growth. We're seeing an increasing number of funding deals growing over the last few years. We're starting to see more and more big corporates such as Google and Amazon coming into the market and making major investments. And we're starting to see not only homegrown venture capital firms, but some of the larger Silicon Valley firms doing deals and making investments right across the region. From our perspective at 𝗃𝗃, 𝗃𝗃 grew out of a team that really established 500 startups right across the Middle East. When they were with 500 startups, they were the most active venture capital investors in the region. They had over 180 deals in just the last 5 years. And, they want to continue to use the business model that they developed at 500 startups. And that basically means investing in a large number of early stage startups that have a base in the MENA or are funded by founders that come from the MENA diaspora, and with a typical ticket size of around $250,000. And then we'll reserve around 20 to 30% of the fund for follow-on funding to support the most promising companies in that portfolio. We are completely sector agnostic. We only focus obviously on scalable businesses that have a tech dimension to their business, a digital dimension to their business plan, but we don't try to choose from one particular industry to another. We focus much more, because we're focusing on early stage businesses, we focus on the team, the quality of the investment, founders teams. A few of the early exits are some of these startups that have done very well in the Middle East with some quite good multiples. And here are some demographics over the recent investments by the team. You can see that Egypt is a major source of deals, followed by UAE and Saudi Arabia. We think this will continue to grow. We are seeing a bit more interest out of the smaller economies like Bahrain, and we plan to have about 10% of the fund attributed to diaspora, mostly out of Europe and the US. And in terms of legal jurisdictions, obviously places like BVI, Cayman Islands, and Delaware are very important. What we want to do at 𝗃𝗃 is really add value to the companies that we invest in. So we're looking at a number of digital tools to really make sure that we give them all the tools they need to grow their business and scale their business rapidly. Many of these, partly because of COVID, involve providing digital solutions to companies and finding a means for them to network and do business together using platforms, digital platforms, rather than being in a co-working space and having that more direct contact. So we're putting in place a growth program that will really support companies throughout that journey. And we're developing this all the time. If you have ideas about things that we can include in that program, I'd be very interested to hear from you. And in terms of where we source deals, well, even though 𝗃𝗃's fund is very new, and without promoting it at all, we have a pipeline of around 700 founders and startups that have presented deals to us. So there's no shortage of deal flow. And I think the key thing is that, the experience of 𝗃𝗃 is that they have been involved in virtually every major startup deal that's occurred in the Middle East region. Because it's at such an early stage, it's quite easy for a VC firm like 𝗃𝗃 to be so hands-on and so involved in most of the deals across the whole geography. All right, well, I'm going to finish there, but I'd be very happy to try and answer any of your questions. I'd love to hear any comments you have. And also hear ideas about how we could work even more closely together and really connect the startup ecosystems in the Middle East with the startup ecosystem that you have that's growing so well in Vietnam. So I'll finish there, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. That was very insightful. Let me pick your brains first, Simon. So from your experiences working in the development boards from Hong Kong to Bahrain, what do you think Vietnam as a country can do to attract a bit more FDI?
Well, I think Vietnam's doing a great job. When it comes to attracting FDI, I think it's important to be very clear about what are the specific opportunities that Vietnam can offer. And I think in your presentation, Thong, you did mention that. But it's important not to talk about too many things. Mm-hmm. Investors want to see, a lot of countries talk about how strong their economy and how well they do in rankings. What investors want to know is, what's in it for me? What can I get? What can I access by having a base in Vietnam? So focusing on specific opportunities, showing momentum in sectors, in areas where you're really seeing growth and acceleration is very important, and conveying that momentum to potential investors to get them excited in the economy.
Great, thank you. So the move to the Bahrain Development Board. So what are your challenges for moving from being in Asia for so long to a whole new region? What were your biggest challenges?
Well, it was a steep learning curve. I'd obviously visited the region, but I'd never lived in the Middle East. So yeah, getting used to the different culture took a little bit of getting used to. But there again, when you're dealing with a startup ecosystem, startup communities tend to be fairly similar in almost any part of the world. So that was a very sort of familiar territory for me. And also many of the people in the startup community were connected to different parts of the world too. So they had a very global mindset, which was very refreshing. The thing that really pleasantly surprised.
Simon, your mic is on mute.
Okay.
All right.
The thing that pleasantly surprised me about Bahrain is that probably because it's such a small place, it's very welcoming, very open, and it's a very easy place for expatriates to move to and adjust to. HSBC Bank has a global ranking of economies around the world and how easy it is for expats to adjust to the life there. And Bahrain is usually in the top 5 or 6 in the world. So that makes it a very easy place to adjust to.
Awesome. Were there any cultural shock in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, little things like adjusting to the Middle East weekend. It's still something that takes me a little bit of getting used to. The fact that we finish working on a Thursday evening and we start working on a Sunday morning took a little bit of adjusting to. But yeah, and adjusting to the different food. I'm very used to Chinese food now, of course, after 20 years in Hong Kong. So adjusting to a different type of cuisine was interesting. And of course, the final thing that is an adjustment is the heat. For 6 months of the year, Bahrain has a beautiful climate, really manageable, beautiful blue skies. But there are 3 or 4 months in the summer when it really does take a bit of adjusting to.
So for all your experiences in the mainstream governmental development, FDIs and such, what attracts you most to the VC activities? And how did you make that change?
Well, I've been following what was happening in the startup ecosystem fairly passively as somebody working with the government. So being able to become directly involved by joining a very dynamic new VC was very attractive. And, over the 5 years that I've been in Bahrain, I've seen not just the number of startups, but the quality of the startups really go from strength to strength. So, the quality of the pitches, the quality of the ideas has really, really improved.
That's amazing. So, about Plus Ventures, what's your traction right now, and what are you working on mostly?
Well, right now we're actively involved in raising capital. We have 3 deals that we're ready to invest in right now. One is a Robin Hood type fintech company that is out of Egypt. One is not a dating app, but actually a marriage app for finding marriage partners, also out of Egypt. So some really quite diverse, but some very interesting deals that are presenting themselves at the moment.
Awesome. That's very interesting. Very culturally different. So what's the main sector you're looking at?
Well, as I say, we're sector agnostic, but there is a lot happening in fintech right across the region. Bahrain is the only economy in the region that has a regulatory sandbox that is onshore. If you go to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they also have regulatory sandbox, but you are restricted to working within that special economic zone. Bahrain is a land-based regulatory sandbox, which is quite exciting for a lot of businesses. There's an awful lot of regulatory reform going on. Again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you are quite a small country, you can copy the successes of other places and you can implement the regulations that they've put in place. So we look very carefully at what Singapore and Sydney and London have done, whether it's in crowdfunding, whether it's in robo-advisory, whether it's in open banking. And because we have only one regulator, we could actually implement those regulations very quickly. And that gave us quite a bit of momentum when it comes to supporting fintech. So sectors like fintech, that are so dependent on having the right regulatory regime, these are sectors that are going to be very active in the Middle East going forward.
That's great. Do you know if Bahrain has any FDI in the region, Southeast Asia specifically, or Vietnam?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any from Vietnam, but we'd love to attract some investment to Vietnam. In fact, we'd like to attract investment in both directions.
That's true.
But yes, we have had some from Singapore in the past, some from Malaysia in the past. Most of the FDI would come from the neighboring economies, places like Saudi Arabia, India, the UK and the US. But I personally would love to see much more FDI, much more interaction with the economies in Southeast Asia.
Sure, because I ask because Saudi Arabia is a big player here, and they're big in renewable energy, and Kuwait is another big name. Because I'm from an energy background, so I keep a close eye with those news. So Kuwait, they joint venture with Japan, Adamitsu and Mitsu Chemicals, and they spent about $10 billion on a refinery. Wow. And it's doing really well. Yeah, it's doing really well. And then Vietnam actually export back the refined oil to Kuwait. So it's quite interesting the way its interaction works, and it's win-win situation. So mostly, so I see the MENA region, mostly the FDI involves energy side, but I hope that they would go into more sectors. As you can see, we have quite a few that are growing, and our high-tech sector is quite interesting as well. And the government is aiming hard for the biotech and high-tech and renewable and environmental issues and solutions. So I hope to see more of these activities going on. It would be great if we could link with Bahrain because it's such a good market, And then it's a shame that it has not been done in such a meaningful way. I mean, after the Vietnam has done the EV FTA or UK FTA, maybe MENA FTA is coming. So.
Well, why not? I think the fact that we don't have very much in the way of FDI flows at the moment doesn't mean that there isn't tremendous potential going forward. And I think, small economies like the GCC and Bahrain in particular are very open to really broadening their base and attracting investors from Southeast Asia too.
That's great. All right. Thank you, Simon. Very insightful. Now I'm going to open the floor to our audience. So, ladies and gents, if you would like to voice your questions and interact with Simon, you're welcome to. Please turn your camera and your mic, and we can discuss whatever questions you have. Please. All right. Who has a good question? Lan, are you there? Can you please speak up? Oh, she's not there. Can I please welcome Yui? Yui, can you ask Simon your question, Yui? Wow, where's everybody? All right, so I guess he's not, maybe he can't hear us. Oh, there it is. So noisy, you can't, okay. So he wonders how the mainstream government, what is niche? What is the VC niche compared to the PE or the public sectors?
I think at the moment, the VCs are really focusing on early stage because that's the level of the startup ecosystem. There are some that are focusing on particular countries, particularly if they have, limited partners that are funded by major government sovereign wealth funds and so on. They can be directed to be focusing on a particular country's startups. There are others that are really quite niche when it comes to fintech, but the vast majority are sector agnostic. They're focusing on a wide variety of different sectors. When it comes to fintech, of course, there is an opportunity with Islamic finance. Taking a fintech company that's been developed in Asia or the UK, and then seeing if it can be Sharia compliant, if it will fit in with Islamic banking. And by doing that, you open that particular fintech company up to a much larger consumer base right across the Islamic world, but also to some very important investors from the Islamic banks who don't have so many choices when it comes to investment products. So I think that conversion of traditional banking fintech products into Islamic banking could offer a real potential.
Interesting. So some of these questions I already picked Simon's brain on. So if anybody could have more questions for Simon.
What is the biggest challenge when working for the Bahrain Economic Development Board? I think the size of the market is both a challenge and an opportunity. If you're a large economy like Vietnam, or you're the gateway to a large economy like Hong Kong and China, then many businesses need to consider you as a potential destination for investment. If you're a very small island in the middle of a not such a big region, then it can be a challenge to get the attention of some of the larger corporates. And that's why I feel targeting smaller scale, high growth companies can be a very good strategy for small economies like Bahrain, where you can come into the market and actually be what we call a big fish in a small pond. You don't have to compete head to head with the bigger players, and you've got the ear of the government as and when you need it.
See. I see a question from New Lei. Can you please ask Simon your question?
Hello?
Right. Please go ahead.
Hello.
So this is I'm actually one of the members of Wiziin.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So from my understanding, VC means they're trying to support the early stage startup, right? And early stage sounds more like that startup is finding the solution for an underserved problem. So do you think VC is more compatible for developing countries than developed countries?
I think VC is compatible for both. But VC isn't generally very early stage. I think there are other sources of funding that that smaller startups can access before they get to a VC. Many, of course, initially go to the 3 Fs, the friends, family, and fools for their first round. Then, of course, you have access to perhaps angel investors or perhaps crowdfunding. I think crowdfunding can be a very interesting source of funding for certain types of startups, particularly if they have a consumer product. Because if you raise some funding from a crowdfunding platform, the people that invest in your company are also going to be very loyal customers and partners. And through word of mouth, they're going to persuade all their friends and family to use your product or your solution. So for some businesses, crowdfunding is, they turn to crowdfunding even if they've got access to other types of finance, purely because of that loyalty factor. So, you know, I think equity, VC is an important tool, but there are other forms of funding that that SMEs and startups can turn to just before they get to that. And of course, accelerators play a very important role in helping companies to get to a minimum viable product, to perfect their pitch deck so that they can really present to VCs going forward.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. Interesting.
All right, I have a very eager audience, but she can't speak right now, so I'm gonna help her out. So she has plus one. She makes sure that she one last question. So number one, please bear with me. Can you repeat again the deal size and equity for VC when they invest in early stage startup? And normally, what are the normal KPIs, achievements, or revenue, profit users when they invest? It's from Van Nguyen.
Yes. Okay. Well, each VC is different. I mean, you've got some VCs that focus on Series A, Series B, Series C, which can go up to 3 or 4 million. We're talking early stage, so we're talking about $250,000 on average. That means that sometimes we can invest less, sometimes we invest more, but it also means that VCs in the Middle East often invest as a group. So whilst we might invest 250,000, we might partner with a number of other VCs that could bring that that round of funding up to something much higher. So there's flexibility there because of the interest in partnering with other VCs. What are the normal KPIs achievements? Well, you know, when we're talking about fairly early stage companies, the key thing that my partners look for is the strength of the team. It's not so much about the technology. It's not so much about, you know, whether you're profitable. It's about the strength of the team and the potential to scale whatever the business is. VCs are not interested in you know, organic growth. They want to be able to see that within 2 or 3 years, your business can grow 5, 6, up to 10 times fast, 10 times bigger. So that's really what they're looking at. But they also recognize that many startups are going to pivot, are going to change their strategy, change their product over time. And so focusing in on the quality of the team and how cohesive that particular team is very important.
So the follow-up question is, how would you evaluate, I guess it's still with DD, how would you evaluate a potential ed tech company? And if you have any experiences with the ed tech?
EdTech is a very interesting sector. There's a lot happening in the Middle East in EdTech at the moment, mainly out of COVID, because people are recognizing that their digital education tools are really not up to scratch, and that even after the COVID period leaves us, hopefully, people are still going to want to find ways to educate using digital tools, or a combination of face-to-face and digital tools. So EdTech is really, really important, and we're seeing a lot of interest in this. So is it scalable? Is it something that you can replicate and roll out to a much, much larger number of consumers or institutions? Those are the questions that people are going to ask. Is it dependent on being in one particular language, or could it be translated, localized, and adapted to a number of different other languages in other different countries?
So the follow-up and last question is about gender gap. What would you feel about receiving a pitch deck that is consisted of a whole female team?
We'd love it. One of the things that we're trying to do at Plus VC is to really focus on female entrepreneurship. There are some perceived stereotypes about female entrepreneurs across the GCC. I would say the percentage of female business leaders is actually higher in Bahrain than it was in Hong Kong. So you've got some very active startups being developed by female founders, and we're committed to supporting that. We're increasingly interested in, focusing on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and support for female entrepreneurs is really a very fundamental part of that.
That's great. I have a question from Thing. Would you like to ask Simon Thing?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm waiting quite long for that question. So it's like I think that we as a VC, we understand that is the hard part is that to find the good entrepreneurs and then try to invest in them. So I just wonder, in the MENA, is there any hub? I mean, the intellectual hub, academy or university that is around entrepreneurs, and we can get into, and then we got the pipeline and deal flows. For example, in Ireland, normally we work with UCD, which is a national university in Dublin. And then it's we have more, like entrepreneurs, and like that in the west side of west coast of America is around Stanford. And in the East Coast is like MIT and Harvard. It's like those hub in the MENA.
Tien, it's a good question, but I'm afraid right across the GCC, the universities are not don't have the same track record, the same experience as you would see coming out of Stanford or MIT or even out of Dublin. I mean, Ireland started its journey towards, a knowledge economy many decades ago, and has gone through many phases, very much funded by foreign direct investment out of the US and the Irish diaspora in the US, of course, and have done a tremendous job in really upskilling their workforce. In the MENA region, we're at an earlier stage. There are some great universities, the American University in Cairo, the American University in Beirut. These are the more established traditional universities that are a great center and pool for talent. But again, this is kind of an opportunity for EdTech. The Emirates, for example, are joining up and attracting universities from the US, from Europe, and from the UK. I myself have been involved in establishing the British University of Bahrain. We now have an American university in Bahrain, but these are new, and it's going to take time for them to really develop a thriving entrepreneurial culture. One of the things that excites me about joining the Applied Science University is I hope to be able to help them to develop their linkages with not just the startup community in Bahrain and the corporate community there, but corporates and startups elsewhere in the world. So we're at an early stage. Sometimes that's at a disadvantage. We can be at a disadvantage, but we can also learn from others' failures as well as successes in the past.
Thanks, Simon. It's well, perfect. And I believe that in the very near future, we hope to contribute more into the development of the Gulf state, and also it's great that we can collaborate in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tien.
Thank you, Ting. Tristan, can you unmute and ask Simon?
Yeah, hi. Nice to see you, Simon. Oh, all right. So my question is, so as a startup founder, how could we be applicable for an accelerator round if we did not have build up done and platform for our project? It's possible for us to apply for accelerator round with just the bridge and very small functional prototype of the product.
I'm not sure I quite understand your question. I mean, it's about applying for an accelerator programs.
Yes. What is the minimum requirement of the functionality of the product? Should we show to the VC to be attractive now for the funding at the accelerator round? Yeah. What is the level of
okay. You want me to rephrase the question for Simon? All right. So Tristan is asking. He doesn't have a functional product yet, but only a prototype. Can he apply for an accelerator? And what are they looking for? And would that be suffice?
I think that yes, applying for an accelerator is the right thing to go for now. The accelerator will help you to get to a minimum viable product, move beyond a prototype perhaps, and help you to gear the attributes of your product so that it could be attractive to a VC. A VC wants to see some traction. They want to see that you've already started on a growth journey. So I think focusing on an acceleration program would be the right step now. And then when you've been through that, using the accelerator, and most accelerators have great relationships with a number of different VCs to get your foot in the door and present to some of those potential VC investors. But if you're still developing a prototype, I would suggest an acceleration program could be the best way to go right now.
Okay, question.
Thanks so much, Simon. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Can I have Min next, please?
Yes.
Can you please ask your question, Min? Thank you.
Okay. What should an investor investing in Bahrain keep in mind?
Well, I think keep in mind some of the cultural aspects of doing business in a Middle East country. So, for example, for religious reasons, you know, things like gambling, for anything to do with, you know, things that don't fit with the sort of Sharia rules are probably not the best things to be looking at when you're going into this region. So anything with alcohol, anything with gambling, these things are not really acceptable and wouldn't do well in the region. But aside from that, there is tremendous opportunities, as I say, particularly when it comes to things like, you know, digital products, digital services, software as a service, and fintech. People and gaming, people are very, very keen on new products. They're all early adopters. They love to try new products and services. And so if you position it right, you can gain quite a high market penetration in a very short space of time within the region. Culturally, the other thing to bear in mind is that sometimes decision-making can be a little bit slower. Probably a little bit like Vietnam, you know, you still need to develop relationships if you're going to do business. You can't do it all by email or even all by Zoom, I would suggest. Sooner or later, you're going to have to meet with people and develop that relationship of trust. So, you know, you need to bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Simon. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Min. Can I have Michael, please? Okay, so.
Hello. Hello there.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Michael.
Hi. I'm talking to you from Cork City in Ireland.
Ah.
Yeah. But I lived in Ho Chi Minh City for 15 years. I just returned to Cork City 6 months ago. Ireland is a small island. So is Bahrain. It's a small island. What are the parallels between Ireland and Bahrain in terms of investment?
Well, I think like Ireland, Bahrain also has to be quite focused on what we want to do. We're not a large market, so we have to be a gateway to other larger markets. That's quite important. And, you know, like Ireland, we need to invest in education. We need to make sure we've got a workforce that can benefit from, you know, an emerging digital economy. And I think we need to keep our global linkages in the way that Ireland has done very, very well. And then the final thing that I think we can learn from Ireland is the fact that Ireland has been amazingly successful in developing relationships with its diaspora. And if Bahrain can do the same, or the GCC can do the same, I think that's very important. Perhaps the closest economy in the MENA region to Ireland would be Lebanon. I think there are many, many more Lebanese outside of Lebanon than there are in Lebanon. But many of them have become very successful entrepreneurs, political leaders right across South America, even in Australia. There's a thriving community there too. So I think developing relationships with the diaspora, particularly when it comes to startups, you know, they can be the connectors that can link one startup community with another. And I think this is something that I'd like to see many of the economies in the MENA do that's similar to Ireland.
Thank you. And I look forward to visiting Bahrain and Vietnam after, well, you know, in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much. I look forward to visiting Cork. A colleague of mine from the EDB has just returned to Ireland. He's taking up a new job at the university in Cork. So I look forward to visiting Cork too.
Well, if you come to Cork, give me a shout and we'll I'll take you out for coffee.
Hope to have you back in Vietnam soon, Michael. Hope all goes well.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, thank you, Michael. We have next WK. Can you please pose your question? All right, so his question is, if Plus Venture would invest to a pre-Series A medtech business in Singapore?
Unfortunately, we can't invest in businesses that have no links to the Middle East or to the MENA region at this stage. But if when they're scaling up, they are looking to have a presence in the UAE or in the region, that at that stage, we would be very interested in having a discussion. But we could also signpost them to other VCs and other investors who might be able to help if that's their location.
All right, I hope that answers the questions, WK. May I have Olivia, please?
Please excuse me for not being able to turn on my camera, but I have a question for Mr. Galpin. As far as my quick research goes, fintech startups are a trend in Bahrain. And I think as a person with more than 20 years in the field, you have encountered many more than you can remember. But I want to ask, what are some of the most outstanding fintech startups in Bahrain, in your opinions? And do you think they can solve the problems, the financial problems, if any existed in Bahrain?
Olivia, that's a really good question. You know, we have a lot of interesting startups. I'm very interested in crowdfunding within fintech. So we have one called Beehive, which is a peer-to-peer lender. And the firm that I'm involved with is an equity crowdfunding platform, but they want to use tokenization because one of the challenges in crowdfunding is the secondary market. It's all very well investing into a number of different startups, but how do you exit? How do you get your money out if you want it? So using tokenization for that secondary market could be the key to really kickstart that. Another one to watch is a company we're investing in now called Thunder, and this is the Robinhood type trading platform that is really doing very, very well in Egypt. There are so many coming up all the time. One of the reasons why fintech is important in the region is that right across all the countries of the GCC, there's a very high percentage of people that are unbanked. A large number of the migrant workers do not have bank accounts. And so finding digital solutions, whether it's remittance, payment, e-wallets, different types of solutions that can enable them to have access to financial service products is very, very important. And we are starting to see real progress with this. So we do see fintech as providing a very important solution to this underlying problem of having a large number of workers from India and around the world that don't have access to normal bank accounts.
That's very interesting. I wanted to follow up on that. So what is the blockchain climate looking in MENA region?
Well, you know, a lot of people have blockchain solutions to their products. Sometimes that can be a bit of a gimmick. You're not always sure why it really needs to be on the blockchain, but people just put it into their business plan anyway. But in other cases, tokenization, I think, is very, very important. And, you know, with the whole ICU thing, there was a little bit of a stigma around and hype around that. But moving into a much more regulated, reformed tokenization of certain assets, I think is going to be important. When it comes to Islamic banking, we have to be careful because under Islamic banking, they recognize an electronic, a digital currency or a digital token if it's underpinned by an actual asset. So if it's underpinned by gold, a share in a company, a share in a piece of land, that's okay for Islamic banking. But if it isn't, if it's like Bitcoin, it's seen as being very speculative. So that side of the financial service economy is closed to certain digital currencies. But it's a growth area. We have a company called Rain, RAIN, which is a major cryptocurrency platform, which is doing amazingly well in the region. And we have a number of open banking, challenger banks that are opening up as well. So there's a lot of scope, a lot of interest in digital currency, but the regulators are being a little bit cautious.
Interesting. A very good question from Thing. Thing, can you please ask the question?
Yeah, sure. As we go deeply into the job of the VC, and as we see that setting up a VC fund is a very tough thing when we need to find the limited partner, the right one, because we stick with them at least for 10 years. So what is the key potential limited partner in the region?
It depends on the VC fund. Obviously, the sovereign wealth funds, and there are fund of funds linked to the sovereign wealth funds. The Al-Waha fund of funds in Bahrain is quite an important fund of funds, and I would encourage people that want to be active in the region to perhaps consider them as an LP. Some of the local banks are wanting to get access to the deal flow of venture capital firms and are now increasingly looking at supporting VCs as well. The telecoms companies, there are a few very big telecoms companies in the region, people like 𝗘𝗧𝗃𝗿𝗄 in Bahrain, and the big telephone companies in Saudi and UAE. These also have an interest in supporting the startup ecosystem. And then finally, and this is a bit more tricky, but has tremendous potential, the big family offices, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and UAE. These family offices didn't used to invest very much in the region. They used to invest outside of the region in places like the UK and the US, but now are increasingly looking at investing closer to home. So targeting the family offices there is important. For us at Plus VC, of course, we are focusing on these more traditional LPs, but we would also like to find LPs in Southeast Asia and East Asia, because we think that by having LPs from other parts of the world, this could be an advantage for some of the startups as they grow. Not all the startups now are going to just be looking at the US as a place to grow. Many of them are going to be looking further afield. And so having an LPs from Asia, we think, could actually help us going forward and help our portfolio companies.
Absolutely. I believe that is a great way to have more LP in this side of the world, because anyway, the financial thing is very, it's kind of developed in terms of Hong Kong and Taiwan, and also yeah, more think about the pension fund. You know, is always a very key partner in terms of limited partner. How was it in Bahrain?
Pension funds, yes. Pension funds sometimes are quite conservative. So they tend to focus, they don't tend to focus so much on VC at this stage in the region. The other challenge we face with pension funds is sometimes they want to, their ticket size is too large. So, you know, we're looking to raise 60 million. Some of them really want to invest much larger sums in the funds. So sometimes you have to go for the fund of fund that the pension funds are investing in rather than the pension fund themselves.
I got this question, which is I believe is a little bit sensitive. So if you cannot answer, just skip it, because we know that there's a very huge hub of both investment and entrepreneur right near you, which is Israel. But in some reason, mainly particular political, it lead to, you know, like some limited operation between the two. So in your case, is there any limited relationship? Because anyway, Israel is very good at creating unicorns, and they're the kind of advanced in terms of the world-class things. So what do you think about?
Well, you know, in my role at Invest Hong Kong, we're very active in attracting investment from Israel. So I've visited Israel a number of times and have had quite a bit of contact with some of the VCs there. Actually, you know, I think there's a lot of potential. And from the moment that the Abraham Accords were announced, what was it, about a year ago, we've seen tremendous amount of interest from Israel. I've had lots of people reaching out to me from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And, you know, as time goes on, I think this is going to create some real opportunities. But remember, not all the GCC has normalized relationships, their relationship with Israel. At the moment, it's Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And, you know, I think that Israeli startups now can start thinking about how they can use UAE, how they can use Bahrain, perhaps to access the rest of the region. And I think both Israel and UAE and Bahrain will be looking at attracting investors in both directions too. So the Abraham Accords is quite fundamental. I think there was a lot of hype at the beginning and a lot of perhaps the expectations were very high. The reality is it's going to take time to develop those relationships and really build those business links. But I'm actually optimistic. I think that this could really go from strength to strength.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have time for my last question? Sorry,
please, we do have one last question, please.
Okay. About asset is you know, pain point on VC, how to asset. And I just wonder, because of one way, very potential and also significant way is that get your startup IPO, right? So can you tell us more about the security market in Bahrain and also in the Gulf states, and compared to Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is so, you know, like very good at creating the security market also.
Well, you know, the securities markets in Bahrain and across the region there is not tremendous liquidity. They have a number of sort of government-linked companies listed on their boards. I wouldn't say it's a particularly dynamic market. I would say that as companies grow, they're probably going to be looking, as the Israeli companies have, at places like NASDAQ. But the vast majority of startups in the region are looking for trade sales. Most of the exits have been sales to larger corporates that are coming into the region and looking for deals. And I see that continuing for a while. I don't really see the equity markets being a viable exit for most startups just yet. And if it is, I think they will follow the Israeli model. I mean, there's a stock exchange in Tel Aviv, but still most Israeli companies choose to list, as you know, on NASDAQ. Hong Kong is an interesting case. I mean, Hong Kong is of course the international market for Chinese companies, mainland Chinese companies, and has done amazingly well, but it's an expensive market to list on. You've got to have quite a lot of, you've got to be quite profitable, and you have to have quite a significant turnover to really think about listing there. There are other markets that have lower barriers to entry that I think the startups in the Middle East should look at first.
Thank you, Simon. Very insightful. Thank you very much.
All right, so I guess that wraps up the Q&A session. Simon's taken us over the world today. I hope you really enjoyed the adventure with Simon today. We've been through Hong Kong, we've been to Bahrain, we've been to Ireland, and so forth. Very fruitful, very informative, and very insightful. Thank you so much, Simon, for spending the time with us today. And I hope we have a chance to chat with you again sometime soon. So
thank you so much, Thong. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for your questions. Really interesting questions. I look forward to visiting you in Vietnam before too long, hopefully when the COVID situation allows that.
Very hopeful, very hopeful. Thank you, Simon. I have a quick word about our new program. As you all know, our startup ecosystem is very dynamic, very fast growing, and there's been multiple success stories in the last few years. We have 2 unicorns now and counting. So lots of aspiring entrepreneurs, lots of passionate and driven entrepreneurs, but not as many investors. So we put together this program called the Vietnam Venture Capital Program, which is focused on the value creation and quality connection between investors and SMEs. And our VVCP, we deliver real-world experience and case study-based practices to help current and future investors fine-tune and apply your investment strategies. This program is online webinars for now because of the COVID, and we provide sort of resources for professionals who want to improve on their understanding of the venture capital ecosystem. For the information, please refer to our fan page. Information will be up there, and we look forward to have you on our program. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Can we have a quick group photo with Simon? Simon, if you could please turn on your camera, and we'll have a very nice group photo. All right, everybody, come on, your last chance.